So why would the Book of Mormon have Egyptian writing in it? BYU studies show that it was used, Egyptian writing was used to consolidate and fit more stuff, more compact, into a smaller amount of space. But it occurred to me the other day, if you haven't seen it, this past weekend I did a live interview with Dr. David A. Falk, biblical Egyptologist. His dissertation is on ritualistic processional furniture, religious furniture, so like the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, he wrote a book of the Ark of the Covenant, and I put it in the description of that video. But his expertise is a lot of I think it's a New Kingdom writing, but he reads and writes Egyptian and many other languages. I think he had mentioned it was like 12 or 15 or something. I can't remember. It was a very large number of what he was able to read and comprehend. So I picked his brain a little bit after the show too. He and I chatted. I'm obviously a big fan of his. I told him, like, not everything he covers are things that I endorse or are automatically all in on. Obviously, the things that are doctrinal differences, theological differences, are the areas where we would part ways ideologically, I guess. But still, I think he has very good resources. He actually told me he knew a LDS archaeologist, a couple of them actually. I think it was John Gee. They've talked about the Book of Abraham before. Obviously, he's not, receptive to the Book of Abraham. No one really is, except for members of the church. And that's the point I wanted to make, is like all these criticisms about it, because I was going through the history, and what you end up having is you have a 12th dynasty Egypt. During this time, the major god that they worship is Sobek, which is the crocodile god. That goes into the 13th dynasty. 13th dynasty deteriorates. The 13th dynasty, during the reign of Neferhotep, also crocodile god, Sobek. We see in the facsimiles that Sobek, the crocodile, is the god of Pharaoh. Really good guess, Joseph. No. But that would be about 1750, 1725 BC. This is where you see a huge Semitic population making its way into Egypt. Again, it's the 12th dynasty. When they start measuring the Nile, they're showing periods of flood, periods of drought, 7-year periods, by the way. And so obviously there's a lot of speculation, even in my earlier videos that I've done way back last at the beginning of this year. So my information is incorrect on the Egypt stuff. And so I want to go back through and remake some of that. But the Hyksos, this is where you see a rise of Proto-Canaanite language. There's a huge break-off. And the argument is, well, we don't have Hyksos records. What made Joseph so popular and so worthwhile was his ability to read and write ancient Egyptian. Hieroglyphics, likely cuneiform as well, and many other variations of the same things that were common through the Levant and Canaan and Egypt and Mesopotamia. But Joseph learned from his father Jacob directly. His brethren probably learned a basic, reading and writing of transactions, things like that, but not the full-scale hieroglyphic things. The hieroglyphics itself, you have to be very efficient, and that's like a priestly training. And here's the thing is, Joseph was considered a priest, a minister, a priest of one of the cultic gods, most likely Amet-Re, or Amun-Re, which is their sun deity, because his spouse came from the city of On. I forget what the Egypt name was again. It's in the video from this weekend, but it's that would have been where Abraham studied. That would have been a cultic center. And then you have Avaris, which is a Hyksos capital. The Hyksos people are a Asiatic or Semitic group that comes in. It's later associated to other rulers, and it typically just means foreign rulers. But they start repurposing Egyptian texts. And the thing is when we see the rise of the new kingdom, and you have the Pharaoh who knows not Joseph, you have Kamos coming up from Upper Egypt, which is south. They come up and conquer Lower Egypt, which is north, near Goshen and all that. They don't know those other guys. They've been basically living separately, doing their own thing. Egypt provided during the time of famine, said that people from all over the world came to them. That type of wording of all over the world, we don't expect people from all over the world to have come, but the known world. So to me, this would suggest even lower or Upper Egypt, which is south, because it's the flow of the Nile. Same thing happens in the Book of Mormon. So, gee, I wonder where that comes from. Anyways, Dr. Falk was telling me some of his objections to the Book of Abraham, because common sense, like it's not. It makes sense to have objections, and so I don't fault people for not believing in something that we believe. The thing is that I hope that people apply that same justification of why they believe what they believe to other people and their beliefs. That same level of apologetics. And I think he does a lot better than most do. He said the text of the Book of Abraham, it's simply, he's like, it's not an Egyptian text. It's not structured grammatically like Egyptian. And I'm like, yeah, that's not surprising, is it? Because Abraham, if there was this huge change coming in, and all the records of the Hyksos, all the people who lived during that time, all the records were destroyed. The big argument is, we have a little here, a little there. But mostly we just have nothing. And a lot of that is because there was not much to begin with. Some of it was just repurposed old stuff. The other part was that the New Kingdom came in and destroyed everything from that intermediate period after the Middle Kingdom. So this is your 14, 15, 16, 17 dynasty. And so if you had Canaanites applying Proto-Canaanite language in their common era out there, in their transactions and what they do in their trade, and they were repurposing some hieroglyphics, that there's evidence of some repurposing We don't have a totality. We don't have a lot of records because there's limited records to begin with. But there is a precedence of them repurposing things. So that kind of leads to, okay, well, in the scriptures, even the book of Abraham, it says he's using Egyptian characters, but speaking the Semitic Jewish language, but using different characters for it. So this is why they call it a reformed Egyptian. It's because it's not using an Egyptian language, it's a Semitic language with Egyptian characters. Egyptian characters that themselves likely would have been altered or changed to some extent. Now, we have that with the Book of Mormon, so why would we have it with the Book of Abraham? Well, the facsimiles are that those things were drawn up probably, within the 1st century BC or the 1st century AD. So why would the hand of Abraham be written on those things? Well, that's a good question, because in 600 BC, with the scattering of Babylon, we see Nephi and Mulek, 2 groups at least that we know of, that scattered, and it sounds like they went in different directions. Nephi is writing in the language and everything that's preserved in the brass plates. We don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is. There's arguments that Jerusalem is protected as long as the Ark is there. Well, Ark is destroyed, but before it's destroyed, the holy records are taken out. Lehi definitely wasn't the only prophet at the time. We obviously see Mulek being led away. I'm not sure if they're led away prophetically. It seems as though they were, but I don't want to speak too much about that. But either way, they kept a record. That in the brass plates, the record, it was a genealogical record. The record of the Old Testament had record of everything from Genesis on. The brass plates contain the record of Lehi. Now, we have people who fled down to Egypt. 2 temples were built in Egypt. Where do you house the Ark? In a temple. Now, I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that it's a possibility. I'm suggesting that there were scattered tribes, and we have a record of 2. Okay. And then whatever is left over from Daniel and his time with Nebuchadnezzar. So he's writing in the same language that is preserved in the brass plates. Nephi is. All right, so he's saying this is awkward, this is hard, and it probably requires a lot of concentration, a lot of focus. And so what did he look to? He looked to Isaiah's example. So the example Isaiah had in the brass plates, you follow that? He reaffirmed that. That's brought up multiple times throughout the Book of Mormon. But you have patriarchs going to Egypt often. And learning a lot there. I don't think Egypt was just the worst place in the world, if that's where the Lord is sending his prophets. It seems like they preserved something. There was something worthwhile. Enough worthwhile to send the patriarchs there to sojourn, to gain experience, to learn, to be preserved. So if Nephi left with the brass plates, what other records were there? Brass plates contained that record. Did each tribe have its own genealogical brass plates? Did each tribe have their own papyri or scribal records? I would think of all things, records would be the thing that is preserved. I mean, Daniel, what records was Daniel pulling from? Because I would think you have in Mesopotamia, the kings are known as collectors. Like there's lots of tablets where they talk about how they're collecting all the knowledge of the world. So I wouldn't put it past them to retain a lot of records themselves. Dr. Falk suggests that the ritualistic processional furniture like the Ark of the Covenant, that stuff, they probably would have dumped out the contents. If there's anything scribal, he said they probably just would have tossed it out. But the furniture itself would have been taken into Babylon, melted down for its stuff, because they have to pay off their army. They have to pay off, their soldiers. And that is how they built wealth. In fact, they had likely built a giant oven in order to heat it at extreme heats to melt these things down and separate the elements. And this is the same oven which Meshach, and Abednego? I can't remember the first names. But Daniel's brethren were likely cast into that same oven pit where these sacred items, like if you did have the Ark of the Covenant in there, and you have cherubim protecting, and then you have a cherubim inside there in fire, the Lord comes down like fire again, protects. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. The thing is that the language which Joseph knew was the saving thing for that Hyksos period. It was his interpretation. It was his ability to, and maybe the reason they gave him a little bit more credit than our priests who interpret dreams, that basically they look for a cited source in the dream and say, okay, is there something about wine? Yes, that's bad. Okay. So the wine giver, the cup bearer, his dream should have been a bad omen, according to Egyptian theology and our dream book. But they didn't have one for Pharaoh. But Pharaoh was willing, likely because he's part of a Semitic group himself, but he was willing to recognize Joseph. Now, there's many reasons for this, because Joseph is of the lineage of Abraham. Abraham is of the lineage of Terah, who is the historical, or more likely than not, the historical Teru of Urkesh. And we know the Hyksos kings, that they are of a lineage that came from, what's that other, not Mira, but, no, not Amarna. There's another kingdom up there in Mesopotamia, a city-state, which they did exchanges with. They would get their spouses from these other city-states and kingdoms, until you have Hammurabi come in and just wipe everything out. Right? Hammurabi is doing the same thing Sargon of Akkad was doing. Is he Nimrod? Or is Nimrod a suggested term of, this is just empire building? Because it seems like people are scattered right when these empires come in, and they become of one language. We already know that many different languages existed, but they're being consolidated into one people, but under the thumb of one empire and one voice, one language. What happens if you step outside the political correctness of today? Hey, we have to be of the same language, okay? You don't use those genders. There is no male and female, according to the Nimrods of today. Well, yeah, they're male and female. It's in the Bible. Look it up. Anyways, use your two eyes. These guys are basically kissing cousins. They've intermarried with each other through the centuries. They've come down, and so they recognize this lineage. He understands how to read and write. These guys end up becoming sojourners just the same way Abraham and his descendants became sojourners. They became Hapiru. They're assassins for hire, tent dwellers. And they're classified as Hapiru, which is a filthy, wandering people who basically you just pick them off the side of the road. Hey, we're gonna go invade a kingdom. We're running low on grain. You guys come with us. How about that? Yeah, let's do that. There was more than just Jacob's family and Abraham's whole family that dwelt in tents. The Amorites consistently would move into an area, a city, kind of integrate into it and then take it over. That was their thing. They just move on in and take it over, and then it collapses because they don't really know how to maintain things. Kind of reminds me of a very well, never mind. I was thinking of like today's politics, but we all know that. I'm not going to state the obvious, but they retained a language. But Abraham had specific training down in On, which is Heliopolis. That's where Joseph's wife is from. Gets that scribal training. He spends time there. He must have got such efficient training to be able to do hieroglyphs. I don't think that there's any contest there. Anyone can contest that aside from saying there's no evidence of that outside the book of Abraham, and even then they say that's not Egyptian. Well, how do you preserve texts? You copy them down. The new people come and copy them down. So why do we have a hypocephalus, the circular disc that goes under the person's head? And it's essentially all the things you would see on a tomb, but consolidated into a small circular disc and put there, right? And upon death, it's like you go to the mortuary, everything is Egyptian culture, right? Like how we have In God We Trust and all that stuff. Imagine an Egyptian back then being buried in our culture and times and having a Catholic priest come and do last rites or something like that. It's essentially the same thing for the Egyptians. That's just the thing. Jacob was mummified. Joseph was mummified. They followed the literal mummification process, which is listed in the scriptures. Not something you would know looking back retrospectively. And so we know that that's a record. That's a record that's preserved. But they took Jacob's body back up into Canaan. Joseph, they had to retrieve his body and then hightail it out. And then again, the images, the characters that we have all have to do with funerary looking things. For us, it looks like washing, anointing. It looks like an endowment. It looks like how the Egyptians planned to go through the afterlife and have these spells to help them. For us, it's the equivalent of having ordinances in life to help us through this life and exalt in the life to come. Right? So hypocephalus is there's no record of having them in Abraham's time. So where did they come from? Oh, that must mean it's all false. I don't think so. Because again, we have so many migrations of Israelites or Jews coming back into Egypt We have it, even early Christians came in and do that. The Coptic religion out there. Very, very, it looks very similar to some things that we might recognize. Albeit a little bit distorted. Or way distorted, actually. But think about that. You have Joseph being buried, considered an Egyptian priest, and having Egyptian markings and everything on that. Do you think that the sons of Joseph had the same interpretation of what those things meant? Or is it in that period of time where we historically have a huge blank spot, just conveniently, and the little bit we do have shows that the people there were altering things. They were reinterpreting it to meet with their own understanding of things. So that makes exact sense and is exactly what Abraham says. There's no way Joseph would have known that. No way Joseph would have had all this understanding and background of the Hyksos people. There's no way Joseph would have known that. And so when people criticize, well, what Joseph wrote down, that's not Egyptian. Well, he's using Egyptian characters with a Semitic grammatical structure and writing style. And how much of those characters changed? The New Kingdom comes in and they're like, why did they write that together? Why does that hieroglyphic look like that? That makes no sense. You know, it may even look apostate to them in a way. So obviously, what are they going to do? They're going to destroy it, especially if they're putting in new things that just did not mean what they said it meant. They're like, why would Anubis be the one who's giving birth to Anubis? They have Anubis in for Ma'at? This makes no sense. You know, there's probably a lot of things that were nonsensical, so they destroy it. What happens with the Catholics when they come through South America? They destroy it. What happens with colonists when we come through North America? See all these other civilizations, mounds, all that stuff, writing, birch bark, whatever, destroy it. What do the Germans do? Destroy. They preserved a lot of stuff for themselves, but things that... freaking crazy guy. But we see the same thing with Taliban and those other guys who were all those terrorists. They're destroying ancient relics. ISIS, there you go. So if we were to look back now, it never existed. But not having evidence of something isn't evidence that it never existed. Absence of evidence is not... That's all you can say, is we don't have evidence for that right now. The thing is the Book of Mormon itself is evidence. We may not have the literal gold plates and everything that was structured off it, but we have the evidence of what was translated and written out of that, and no explanation of how it could have been done. Like, it could not be redone. There's no way to know these things, and for all these arguments against it to, throughout the past 200 years, be proven false. Not only that, but mainstream scholarship of Christianity is slowly learning what was revealed to us 200 years ago. Little by little. I mean, they still argue about it. And us, we get caught up in their arguments and culture, and we implement it into our thing sometimes. But we're going to have records of Abraham and Joseph. If they're coming out and building temples in Egypt, don't you think they would brought some records, and what records do they have to work off of? Well, Joseph's tomb, for starters, or his sarcophagus, they have that. They have the writing that is on that. What about the hyposyphilis? Why did that come out? Hyposyphilis? But that comes out later, and it almost looks like a budget-friendly, new trend for a mortuary thing. Hey, can't afford a temple or a tomb? No worries. Just, you got a cave, we'll wrap him up, and we'll give him this disc. That way he has all the prayers and everything. I could see that as something being very legitimate. And if they've already attributed meaning behind these things, then they would have that. We already see how much the Jewish tradition changes when it's outside of Jerusalem. We saw the Jews fall into Canaanite and pagan religions, and then have to be brought back. They went through periods of apostasy. Early Christianity went through apostasy and had the great apostasy. But somehow, just because we have additional record that, like, if it proved true based on the knowledge that was available in the 1800s, it would not be true today. Instead, what's happened is we continue to get more validation. And there's some bias from us. There's bias on their side too. But it seems like if everything was written in Egyptian, then he would have been called pagan. Because there are no Egyptian characters to describe. There's no Egyptian hieroglyphic that doesn't involve their religion. And that's why Abraham says, this is to represent this. Do we have that original papyrus? No, we don't. We have nothing to compare it with. We know the writing around the hieroglyphics is not talking about the same thing. So it's not really an argument about it against it, because we already have precedents that just because you have something written right there doesn't mean it's exactly relating to that image. And we do that with images today. So if the book of Abraham, and it is, were authentic, it would be structured, when translated into English, structured in a Semitic pattern. It would have altered Egyptian characters and an altered application of Egyptian characters. If it was happening with Abraham, then it would be happening with Nephi. If it was happening with Nephi, we would expect it would happen with Joseph and Abraham and those groups who came down out of Israel and scattered to different places, like Elephantine and another location in Egypt. Also, a place in Egypt where Christ, Joseph, Mary, their family all went and fled to, and where the wise men found them. So it just makes sense. And the more I look into it, the more validating it is. Now, I didn't go through all of that with Dr. Falk because I already know his stance on it. But some of the things we discussed, was a little bit surprising. Like, there's one thing that I'm a little confused about. I'm looking at the Joseph Smith papers. I was looking where it would give the name of Egyptus, because Egypt wasn't a thing until way later, right? But Joseph is translating and interpreting into what we commonly would understand. And what people understood at that time was a King James version of the Bible. And so he's using language that is associated. And if there is no room for that language, he gave, like a new name for or something close to it. For lack of an existing word to use. So when he says Egyptus, and Egyptus is the daughter of Ham, and we learn in the book of Abraham that was the daughters of the sons of God. Noah's sons were the sons of God. They bore daughters, and they married the sons of men. So you're going from a covenant relationship to outside the covenant. Applying a feminine also can denote city building or empire building or nation building. So Egyptus, was that the literal name? No. But whatever name that is, it was talking about the land of Egypt and saying how that Egyptus came with her son to build up, a kingdom patterned at the best after what they knew. And the best they would have known is something close to the city of Enoch. And I'll tell you what, Egypt, everything about Egypt looks like it's trying to imitate and recreate the city of Enoch, albeit, without authority. And so you have Egyptus, whatever that name really is. Let's call her Gertrude. Gertrude marrying outside the covenant, but coming into Egypt and bearing her son. Now, the son being the first pharaoh. We know that Menes is the first pharaoh. We have the Shabaka stone, which comes from around the first dynasty, and it has inscribed all over it temple imagery and text and stage directions for creation. It talks about creation. In fact, almost every temple thing we go to and see, the temple is giving an explanation for creation. And over time, people literalized it. Said, yes, we believe in 13 monkeys that flew around and bound their tails together to create the earth. No, nobody actually believes that as a representative of something. It's to represent a creation of something that they understood in that context. If we don't understand the context of ancient times, yes, you need the Spirit of God to understand. But to me, I feel more a desire to learn. Even Joseph Smith met with a rabbi. He studied things. He studied endlessly. So it doesn't mean that we're just naive and wait for the Holy Ghost to download information to our heads. It doesn't work that way. If that's the way you think, I'll tell you what, that is incorrect. But we're meant to learn. And the Lord highlights those things that we can perceive through the power of the Holy Ghost. Those things which serve a purpose and a need. If we're asking and we can use that information, don't you think He would highlight that? If it's unsealed and available. If it's been understood once before, unless we're too wicked, and wickedness, darkness blinds our minds, our understanding. But I really do believe that it shouldn't be evidence to believe in something, but it certainly should not be a criticism that would break down your faith. It shakes a lot of people's realities, because what they perceive to be true, it breaks their perception and their expectation. If they expect everything to be as literal as it's described, just for a scholar at college to abruptly rip that out and say it's not true, they probably don't even have the truth either. Their interpretation is certainly not true, because they're looking at the apostate, broken, pagan, mixed view of what that is, and not the original view. They're looking at the possible latest date of existence, or a possible earliest date. They don't always have exact everything. So, I don't know. I hope this is interesting. I hope Stick of Joseph actually covers some of this. And maybe I'm completely wrong, but I am purposely not asking questions to abrupt things, people of a different theology, like on his channel. I'm not going to impede my knowledge. Somebody else asked these questions, and it highlighted to my mind, reaffirming my belief in the Book of Abraham and the Book of Mormon, reaffirming, maybe just strengthening. So if that's interesting to you, I hope it is. If not, sorry. Oh gosh, it's snowy, sunny, getting a little bit of burn on my face. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'm still editing the video from Dr. Falk. It's available on my live section on my page, but I'm going to be editing down certain topics. The audio on my end is just crud. So I was using a new microphone and camera, and it was canceling out background noises. So as a result, it cuts my verbiage short, delays what it hears and cuts it short. So just stinks, but it's okay. Live and learn.